Welcome to Power and Purpose. Today, Nathalie and I are delighted to welcome Sylvie Goulard, who's currently Professor of Practice in Global Affairs at SDA Bocconi School of Management in lovely Milan, Italy. She's had a rich and diverse career, serving as a member of the European Parliament, defense minister in the French government, and vice governor of the Banque of France. She also served in advisor roles, including in the French Foreign Ministry and in the European Commission as advisor to then President Romano Prodi. And in addition, she's the author of several books on Europe. Sylvie, welcome to the show.
Hi, welcome you in my in my house.
Wonderful, Sylvie. I'm absolutely delighted to have you on the show. And I know that you're speaking to us from Paris. So let me jump into our conversation by asking you a question about the rise of the far right, which obviously in France has a very particular meaning. And I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit about the political moment in your country now, how, on the one hand, you can interpret and configure the rise of the far right in France, and what's your assessment as to the way in which non-far right liberal democratic forces are confronting this threat in your own country?
Thank you. Well, I like the way you put it, the question, because in my opinion, there is on the one hand something that is quite global, which is people are worrying for their future. Very similar problems in very different countries, by the way. For example, if you look at the difficulty of housing, difficulty to get an appointment to the medical doctor, etc., which matters for the people. It's quite the same in Italy, in Germany, in the UK, elsewhere. So the feeling that some areas of the countries are left behind, some people don't have access to services, that their life is not going to be as good as they consider it was, even if there is a part of aging in all this, in my opinion. But so there is something that belongs to a broader movement. And there is something special, which is actually the fact that the moderate parties are not close enough to the people's preoccupations, to their worries, to their concerns. And if you take Europe, from the European issue, for example, actually we have 50 shades of nationalism. We don't have an alternative project when all the extreme right is pushing for national solution, national interest without defining them. But so there are specific elements linked with the failure of the political party, the traditional ones. And in France, if you remember well, when Macron was elected the first time in 2017, the political parties were considered already very weak. They are even weaker, but the person who destroyed them further is himself in the destruction process, as you had in Italy with Matteo Renzi, the rottamazione, and he was himself then expelled. So in my opinion, there are, to a certain extent, good reasons for some people to worry, and no answer that is really convincing on the other side. I'm not saying that the extreme right has the answers, but at least they make as if they would listen to the question.
What's, I think, so troubling about France is that when Macron rose in a context in which the Rassemblement National was rising, it seemed like that could be an answer. So in a world in which the political spectrum was no longer a neat left-right spectrum, and in which it was increasingly characterized by vertical axis between open and closed systems, as the closed was rising, right? Nationalist, populist forces, both on the far left and on the far right, there was Macron that represented something on the other side, that could be equally appealing. And I think what's so troubling about the French story alongside France itself is that apparent failure of that model, I think, has much wider implications in terms of leaving us clueless in many ways in terms of how is it that we address this phenomenon.
Yes, you're right. In 2017, Macron represented a kind of hope of something new. And I would say that the reason why he's where he is, so there are very different reasons. One is the very vertical French system he trapped himself in, because he made a campaign at that time with a very grassroots contact to the population. I don't know if you remember promises of new opportunities for people who are living in the suburbs, for the women, etc., etc. So the reason why people voted for him were, in my opinion, excellent and were answers to many of the concerns. But then the way he governed in the very vertical Fifth Republic system played a role, and it is his responsibility. I'm not saying it's only the institution, but let's say the framework did not help. And another point is that for many reasons, including the fact that the French did not make enough efforts for their public finances, the big bet of Macron, and I accompanied him to Berlin, was to make sure that there is a relaunch of Europe with the Germans. And this did not happen. Some projects were launched, for example, like the plane, the military aircraft. But the fact that France was not taking seriously enough the state of the public finances gave the Germans, who wanted not to move, a fantastic opportunity to hide behind. So it was a little bit of the responsibility on both sides. On the other hand, for example, the speech at La Sorbonne was on the one hand very interesting and much too long and much too complex. In my opinion, if you want to get a result in Europe, you need to have one or two priorities. You cannot have more.
Yeah. And one of these is, and certainly one that is very close to your heart, is defense. And France has really been at the forefront, in fact, the originator of the whole push for European strategic autonomy. And this has been something that President Macron has pushed for. And it's a notion that has gone through many ups and downs, especially considering our relationships with others, and in particular the United States. But here we are, I think, with Trump 2 on the one hand and Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the other, where, for better or worse, this is a concept that has returned very much on the agenda. What's your sense of how we are doing on that front as Europeans, and how do you see this moving forward?
Well, it's a very nice question. The first thing I would say is that the French always push for autonomy and always block. If you remember, in 1954, the French blocked the Community of Defense with reasons that are understandable, because the Community of Defense was placed under the umbrella of NATO, and this is exactly the reason why the communists at that time and the Gaullists refused. So there is always this tango dancing between pleading for Europe and dreaming of national autonomy at the same time. And I must confess that it is very difficult to get out of this, because clearly you cannot delegate your security outside a very strong framework, but nobody has ever tried to build this very strong framework. So it's quite easy in France to develop this kind of reasoning. I hope now that the change in Germany, not everywhere, but in Germany, which is quite clear, and here G.D. Vance may have done the largest part of the work, is to push for something autonomous. The key question is, will we live forever with coordination of national autonomous systems, or do we need more? And how will the other partners behave? And for example, Italy is very far from making the same step as Germany, even if for historical reasons, everyone can understand it has been for a long time also reluctant. And it was very easy to stay under the American umbrella. And last point, there is also the American ambiguity. I remember perfectly the fact that the Americans are always pushing for burden sharing, but burden sharing keeping control of armament and command, which is something, in my opinion, that was not very, very smart and promising.
Sylvie, we could certainly spend the rest of the podcast talking about European defense and the U.S. position on these issues. But I wanted to shift the conversation a bit from the policy to the personal. And as someone whose own career was transformed by study abroad, I've been fascinated by others' early international experiences. You've mentioned Germany a couple times in this conversation. And I understand that you were a high school exchange student to Germany, which gave you proficiency in German that then ended up being useful for your early career in the foreign ministry in France. And so I'm interested in hearing a little bit about young Sylvie and how those experiences in Germany perhaps shaped your career, your thinking about Europe, and really how you expected things to unfold at that point in your life.
Well, first of all, in life, do what you like. And for me, the relationship to the Germans was not highly political. It was with a young girl of my age. And I loved her very much. I think it was quite reciprocal. And this is one of the nicest gifts you can have in life. And above all, between countries that were supposed to be enemies. But my family was not at all on this line. And it helped. So I really feel at home in Germany. And at the same time, I know how different we are and how difficult it is for the two countries to work well together. So this is really something I began with. But for me, it's either you manage to make the positions converge or it will be very difficult to move Europe. But once again, I don't want to tell the young people who may listen to this podcast that when I was 14, I was thinking a lot about my future. I was enjoying very much the cliques, the basketball, the live swimming pools, etc. It was my main interest at that time.
You have certainly gone on to have a very impressive and diverse career. And what's striking is it's followed a very non-linear path in many ways. You've worked on defense, you've worked on economics, you've worked on foreign policy, and you've also worked in a range of institutions from national governments to the EU to finance. I have found often in conversations with students that they think that they need to pick a lane and stay there. And so I'm curious how your career unfolded in these very different directions. And in particular, I'm interested in the moments that we don't see in your biography that perhaps led you to make some of these shifts between very different institutions and different fields.
First of all, maybe some people would be very happy in swimming in a lane, and I'm not pretending that what I did is a model or whatever. But for me, one thing is sure is that all the changes I made were because of some people I've ever met. And I would recommend to bet on the people rather than on the topic or an institution. And as I said, my relationship to Germany was mainly based on personal relationship. Then, for example, when I went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I decided to go to the legal department because I was a lawyer, but much more because the head was a fantastic man who told me immediately, you know what, we will have fun. I send you to New York in the next 3 months, etc., etc. Then the reason why I worked with Romano Prodi is that I refused a job in Pascal Lamy's cabinet because I had a very small baby. It was my third daughter. When they made me the offer, it was not something I wanted to accept, but it was completely crazy for a French person to refuse to go to Lamy's cabinet. But anyway, so sometimes you refuse something and you get something better. And you talked about the books. For example, one of the chants of my life was to meet Robert Badinter, with whom I wrote this book on Turkish accession 20 years ago. And we had a lot of fun here again and some influence on the debate in France. So I've never thought, but maybe it's not what people should do. I never thought so much. I followed my instincts. And the same as I discovered Macron before he was a candidate to the presidential election. And he was one of the very few French ministers ready to go to Brussels, to speak English, to meet lots of MEPs. So we began like this.
Sylvie, what you were just saying actually resonates so much. I think you're absolutely right. It's really about the people that you meet that often just makes the difference. And it actually reminds me right at the beginning, not even of my career, but actually of my studies. I was convinced I was going to become an economist. And were it not for the fact that when I ended up as an undergrad in Oxford, I met who back then was my international relations tutor, Nairi Woods. Nairi had such a big impact on my life. And all of a sudden, I decided I was going to do international relations and I wasn't going to do economics at all. So I think when you were saying it's just about the people that you meet, really, I think that's so, so true. But something I wanted to ask you, looking back across your career, which would you say was your proudest moment?
Maybe one point in the search of new experiences, there were meetings, as you said, but also the fact that I very much like new challenges. I needed to change also topic. And if you have different competencies, now I'm doing a lot on greening and sustainability, but you have the background on security or in economics, it's, in my opinion, richer. So to come back to your question, when I was at the European Parliament, I was member of the Econ Committee, so the committee dealing with finance and monetary issues, etc., in the financial crisis. So I had the opportunity to meet big CEOs of banks and insurance companies, etc. But at the same time, I was chairing an intergroup, which is an intergroup is something informal at the European Parliament, bipartisan, so mixing MEPs from very different horizons on a specific issue. And the intergroup was the one fighting against poverty. And the tradition was to organize meetings with deprived people, with homeless, with people who were in jail. So the part of the citizens you can spend your life long in politics without really meeting. And we organized meetings with people in charge. So we organized one with Benoît Cœuré, who was in the board of the central bank. We organized one with Mario Monti, one with Valdis Dombrovskis, one with Emmanuel Macron. It was always behind closed doors. And I must confess, it was not a highlight from me. It was simply among the richest meetings I've ever made in life. And I owe so much to these people. And at the same time, I had the opportunity to meet the people who are supposed to be powerful, etc. So I think in life, talk to everybody, I would say. Don't just spend your time with the ones who are supposed to be the elite, and look at the people who are sometimes neglected because they have talents, they have competencies. It's not pity or charity or whatever. If you ask yourself, what are they bringing to the societies? They bring a lot in terms of solidarity, in terms of the evidence that some of policies are failing. So it's a good way to remain humble.
Connected, yeah, absolutely. And a question in the opposite direction. In this podcast, we talk about not just challenges, but we even talk about failures. We all have failures. And for many people, often those failures are somewhat concealed. We tend to see the perfect CVs, the perfect stories, and we actually don't know enough about things that didn't work out. In your case, you can almost say the opposite. You have had, and I watched it aghast, to be honest, but you have had a very public, if I may put it in these terms, failure. When you were designated as commissioner, you went through, looking at it from outside, an absolutely awful experience. And I'm wondering, if you wish, if you could tell us a little bit about that, but also tell us how you handled the public dimension of a failure, how you dealt with the public element of this, I think adds a twist to what we're trying to bring out in this podcast.
Well, I could write failure for dummies, it's true. So I'm absolutely able to tell you about this awful experience, maybe for the ones who don't know me. So I was designated commissioner by Macron. And because President Macron supported Ursula von der Leyen as president of the Commission, some people wanted to have revenge. And I can tell you that it was everywhere in the press. So I'm not saying I had the perfect CV, but I don't have the feeling that not all members of the European Commission are Nobel awarded people. So it was something interesting to observe to a certain extent, as when you are yourself at the center of a trap that usually you read in the books, and books with people having some imagination, but it was horrible. So how do you survive? First of all, I must confess that the public aspect was clearly unpleasant, but for me, it was not the worst. For me, it was the missed opportunity to contribute at a moment where I felt I've been preparing myself for 30 years. And I could be in charge, not pretending to do everything right, but to be where I belong, and to be sacked, and sometimes by people who knew you well, with whom you worked well, is something quite strange. Anyway, so the first thing is that in life, if you only look at your image, you are a poor person. The problem is what you can do, not what you are or are not. The second thing, I have a fantastic family and I have good friends. And I can tell you, this is a fantastic opportunity to realize who loves you really or not. Because I had a lot of support, including from incredible people. For example, I can't say it, Margaret Vestager, with whom I was supposed to work very closely, called me regularly. She never forgot about me. She has been fantastic since the beginning, and she's continuing. And there are many others I cannot all mention. Sometimes very, very simple things, but very important. Of course, I don't recommend to go through this type of thing. On the other hand, to be honest, there was such a part of political Machiavellian, stupid, unfair element that it was difficult. No, I had to struggle with the judicial aspects, because then some anti-corruption association in France multiplied the judicial things, and it was quite hard. But here again, to come back to what I said before on the poor people, when you're in the mess, look at the ones who are even in a worse mess, because you always have people. I was privileged. I had my family. I had enough money. I had the support of fantastic people. So this is the most important thing. And maybe, it was exactly that what was missing in my CV. The fact that you stand exams, that you are the ones kicking all the boxes. At the end, if you have good parents, you were educated in a family where people were pushing you. I had a fantastic father, considering I could do everything like a boy. So I have little merit, actually, in many things I did before. To survive this kind of experience is something more personal, and you need some strength inside, and maybe also because I believe in God, and I remember the nicest SMS I received was from someone from the Evangelische Kirche in Germany. This person text me, "You will never fall underneath the hand of God." And I found it brilliant.
Looking at all of the jobs you've had, most of them are very high stress positions. You've just described what was, I'm sure, a very stressful situation at the time. Natalie and I have talked a lot in previous episodes, as well as our guests, about how we've tried with varying degrees of success to stay healthy and sane in these jobs. And so I'd be interested in your experiences, whether there were things you found particularly useful, how you handle stress. Is work life balance possible in these demanding roles?
Well, you do your best, huh? You do your best. First of all, choose very well the partner with whom you have your children, because it is quite important for men and women. Second, try to, I would say, to keep some time to think and to breathe and in my case, to swim. You need to have something else in your life. You cannot stay the whole day in front of your computer. I remember when I was defense minister, there was a guy in charge of the place where the minister is seated. And he told me at the beginning, you know what? I will put from time to time half an hour in your agenda in order for you to go in the garden, or to have a nap, or just to do nothing and relax. I found this a little bit strange for someone who did not know me, etc. But I realized very, very quickly that, thanks God, he had blocked from time to time some slots. For example, I tried to swim further, which was not very easy. I was always afraid that they would put only people from the special forces in the swimming pool, because I wanted to be someone living normally. And as we were in a state of emergency with very high terrorist threats, etc., it was quite difficult. So I'm very, very grateful for all the people around me who helped me a little bit. And of course, my husband and my children, because without them, I think I would not have liked to be in these positions and be 200% swallowed by the position.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel like swimming with a lot of special forces in the pool would be very motivating. I admire you for doing that. When I was in the White House, I had intentions to block out every day time to take a walk at lunch or time for reading, and almost without fail, I ended up canceling that block of time and not using it. But I agree, it's important to try and carve out those moments for yourself to think and reflect. I wanted to ask you about women's leadership as well. I know in your various jobs, you've spoken about the importance of promoting more women, that you worked at the Banque of France on efforts to understand the impact economically of gender inequalities. You've spoken publicly about the need for more diverse pools of candidates in European Parliament appointments. I'm interested in your thoughts on what are the barriers still in 2025 to getting more women into these positions? How do we overcome them? And also any reflections you can share on the importance of women's leadership, the difference that women leaders make. I certainly for you in very prominent positions like defense minister, which is traditionally the purview of men, and also in a leadership position in a financial institution.
Well, first of all, for me, it's not a topic for women. It's the way you look at the society, in which kind of environment you want to live. So it's, for me, the challenge is for men and women to change the distribution of roles. And you can have men who would be delighted not to play the leader, not to be the tough guy, etc. So first of all, it is for men and women, and we should stop opposing. Second thing, some men are striking back. Clearly, you ask me 2025, I fear that some type of behaviors coming from the other side of the Atlantic are not helping a lot. But if you look at Italy, for example, apparently some women like it. So I would not say it's all the men, all the women, but we should be very careful because it is clear that some people are coming again with the idea that women should go back home and cook and take care of the children, etc. And it happens elsewhere. If you look at the governments of Emmanuel Macron in France, unfortunately, step by step, the number of women in the most important positions was decreasing, and it is not a good idea. So, I mean, in my opinion, what you should fight for is really diversity. It can be diversity of genders, diversity of ages, diversity of citizenship or education, culture, whatever. I'm in favor of diversity. I was educated by parents who were, thanks God, beyond all these identity obsession that people are selling now as something completely normal. You're obliged to be to feel trapped in your country. Or I think I really consider strange when Catholic people pretend that nationalism and Catholicism are compatible, because the main message of the Catholic Church is to be universal. So we should abolish the barriers which played a role in the construction of the European community. Adenauer, Schuman, they were the Gasperi, some others. They were they were people having a very strong faith. You cannot continue to fight war and build peace if you trap people in national things. So diversity is good because you are obliged to work with people who are diverse. And for the rest, I can tell you it was tough. I'm quite sure that I would not have put as I was in question at the European Parliament if I would have been a man. My successor, for the one who was designated, it had millions of shares in the fields he would examine. So it was not a problem. One of the things people, my main big error in life was that I had a contract with an American think tank, and I was well paid. For women, this is something, it's unbelievable. Where women are dealing with economy, finance, and are well paid. I can understand that some men who are not very competent and until now enjoy the lack of competition are a little bit afraid. So to all the women and the young men listening to the podcast, be careful because some of the rights we have been fighting for could well be put into question, and everybody will lose in this. Beginning with our countries where demography should really encourage the governments and the political, the people in charge to use all talents without losing anyone.
It's very clear, right, that there is pushback against all of this. As you say, it's happening and coming from, in many respects, the United States, but of course it's happening here in Europe too and elsewhere. I guess if one is to look for a silver lining in this, the pushback is happening because change is happening. And every process of change is not linear in nature. You can make the same argument actually on a completely different topic. Let's take climate, right? Another topic that's very close to your heart. The pushback against climate action is precisely the product of the fact that energy transition, for example, is happening. One needs to sort of keep the fight on and not lower the guard and not, as you were saying, not assume that because you have actually acquired a particular right, what you have acquired is there to stay. It requires a continuous fight, which kind of brings me to my last question to you, which would be if you were to leave our listeners with one piece of advice, what would that be?
Don't listen to the people with gray hair and do what you want to do. When I discuss with young people, I always try to avoid advices, actually. I think the most important thing we can do with younger people, and I enjoy very much, is to help them understand what they are, what they really want, what is for them, not what I want to push them. Because as you said before, we can have a huge influence on people. And we should be very careful with that. It is a huge responsibility as well. And that's the reason why I will try to let this person arrive to the conclusion. Sometimes you see what kind of conclusion they want to take, and they ask you and they test and they want you to confirm. In this case, I must confess that I always do the contrary in order to encourage them to check if they agree. But if I may, Nathalie, in my opinion, you said climate and gender are two different topics. No, it's the same. It's the question of, do you respect life? Do you respect the planet? Do you respect another person? Or do you consider you are the master of the universe? You decide and everything must be under your control. So for me, the fact that certain people are, and I don't want always to put the blame on the US because they exist everywhere, but if you observe well, it is very rare that someone who would be very respectful with women, very much in favor of diversity, is not at the same time someone understanding that nature is suffering and that we need to do something for it.
Sylvie, we like to end this podcast on a positive note, although, as Nathalie said, you've been very positive with excellent pieces of advice throughout. So let me conclude our time together by asking what has brought you joy in recent days?
I had a great chance this week to meet again a woman with whom I was in touch before 2014, and life separated us. And we met again this week because we are worried. We wanted to exchange. I'm not going to give all the details, and you know what? When you had no news from someone for more than 10 years, and you begin again to discuss, and you have the feeling it was yesterday. But this is really great. And in all this mess, as Nathalie said, I think many people strike back because some evolution are taking place. And about women, let's think about the women in Afghanistan or in Iran. I cannot complain that I was sacked by the European Parliament when some poor women don't have the right to laugh or to go to school in Afghanistan. So we can stay positive and consider that we have already achieved a lot, but never stop. So, and that's the reason why I was also so happy yesterday, because this person is sharing some of my deepest concerns. And many people tell me I am pessimistic because I am concerned about the current situation. And I don't think I'm pessimist. I think we should not underestimate the risks we are facing and really fight to keep joy, to have the chance to ask ourselves what makes us happy and not just where could I hide myself in an authoritarian regime, which is something that I don't want to see again in Europe and anywhere, by the way. But I'm European, so.
No, absolutely. And that's exactly why Natalie and I wanted to launch this podcast, to remind listeners that there's a lot of good people who have and continue to work in foreign policy, and to remind people exactly as you said, that it's important to continue to look for things that bring us joy, especially in connections with other people, especially during these really difficult times that we're facing, frankly, on both sides of the Atlantic and other parts of the world as well.
So thank you so much, Sylvie, for being with us. This has been an absolutely superb conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, the two of you. Bye-bye.
Power and Purpose is an IE Insights podcast produced in association with IE University and Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Production and sound design by Reptile Studios. We'll be back soon with the next episode. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Power and Purpose wherever you get your podcasts.